Have you ever had a deal fall apart? Well, I'm about to share some things that you can do in all of your transactions moving forward to keep those deals together. You ready? Let's go. Hey, what's up? My name is Chris Martin, real estate agent, investor, coach, and if you have not already, do me a favor, subscribe to the channel, and also check out some other videos while you're here. All right, so we're gonna be talking about how to prevent deals from falling apart, how to make them stick together if you're an agent. One of the most exciting things in real estate, if you're an agent, is getting an offer accepted. It's like these highs and lows, this emotional roller coaster of real estate. That's one of the highs. You get an offer accepted, you're like, yes, all of my hard work has finally paid off. You're already calculating your commission and you're getting ready to get that commission check at the closing. You can already see it, you can smell it, you can taste it, and then what happens? You have this emotional low where the deal falls apart. Well, if you're an agent out there and you're thinking, you know, there's nothing I could have done to save that deal, a lot of times you're wrong. There are things that you can do to save a deal, and we're going to be talking about those things right now. First and foremost, to go back on that point, we should be constantly thinking about what we can do better in a real estate transaction. If you think you have it all figured out, you're wrong. I've been in this business for about 15 years and I'm still getting better, deal by deal, day by day. We should always be looking for things that we could have done better. Sometimes it's simply picking up the phone more. Could you have picked up the phone a little bit more during that transaction? Could you have had a better tonality in that transaction, dealing with the other side and negotiating that deal? So we should be always looking for opportunities to grow, and we should be looking for opportunities to anticipate what could go wrong in a transaction. We can anticipate and look ahead to see what the major obstacles are in a real estate transaction. That way we can prevent them. So with that in mind, let's start from the beginning. Financing and pre-approvals. What could go wrong with that? So speaking from the buyer agent perspective, we want to make sure that your buyer is lined up with a legitimate lender who is going to give a pre-approval and basically back that pre-approval. Once they give that pre-approval, you know that it's a sure thing that deal is going to close. If you're on the listing side, before your seller accepts an offer, you want to go to those offers you have on the table, if you have more than one, whatever offer you're considering, going over that offer with the seller and doing your due diligence before you present that offer to the seller by calling the lender that buyer is associated with, and whether you know them or not, introducing yourself and seeing how that lender actually came to terms with issuing that pre-approval. What documents do they collect? And allowing them to answer that question for you. And hearing what they say. Do they collect their last couple of years of tax returns and W-2s? Do they look at their last 60 days of bank statements, their last 30 days of pay stubs? Did they run their credit? Because I want to know that they've done this in order to issue that pre-approval, and they didn't just issue that pre-approval based off a conversation that a buyer had with them. So a pre-approval is just what it sounds. It's a pre-approval. It's not an approval. An approval comes with a commitment from the bank that they're committing to loaning that property, which that money for that property, which usually comes 7 days or so before the closing. So you have a lot of time between the accepted offer and the commitment. So you want to make sure that pre-approval is strong. And here's a tip. Do not trust lenders' extension requests. Meaning, if it comes down to they don't have a full commitment, they still need to get some documents verified, the lender may ask, can we extend this another day or two? Don't believe them. If they're saying another day or two, get that commitment extended for 4 days. Get an extra day or two on top of what the lender's asking, but don't tell the lender that, because then they're just gonna take their time and use all of the days possible. When they ask for an extension, you're the one as an agent that has to go to the other side and actually ask for that extension. The seller does not have to grant you an extension. So that could be the deal falling apart. Also, when you ask an extension, there always is a red flag that pops up, right? They're like, oh, why do you need an extension? So just think, if you're asking for one extension, then you go back and the lender still doesn't have a commitment, and you have to ask for another extension, another red flag is going to be raised. So extend that extension to a reasonable time. Ask your lender, what is the drop dead date that you can get this commitment, and whatever they say, add add another day or two on that. Next up is we have the inspection. This is the biggest obstacle in a transaction where deals are likely to fall apart if they're going to fall apart at all. It's going to happen during the inspection. The buyer can basically walk away for anything that they feel uncomfortable about that property. So we want to set proper expectations with the buyer if you're on the buying side. If you have a buyer consultation, which you should, by the way, for every buyer that you're meeting with and showing properties to, you should let them know what's expected during that inspection process. Look, when we hire an inspector, when you pay for an inspector to come through, here's what's going to happen. It's going to take 1.5 to 3 hours for the inspector to go through the property. You'll follow alongside them. They'll be talking about everything from the heating system all the way to the roof, and they're going to let you know the life expectancies of things and all that stuff. So they're going to point out all the flaws of this property. This is something that a lot of these flaws you should be expected to take on as a homeowner. Let's face it, there's not a perfect property. So if you're going out there as a buyer, and if you've bought a property before, anyone who's bought a property before, you know you're never going to check all the boxes. I don't care how big your budget is, you're never going to hit 10 out of 10 boxes. There's always going to be something. The house is perfect, but the yard sucks. The yard is perfect, but it doesn't have that extra bathroom. It has the extra bathroom, but it doesn't have a finished basement. Whatever. There's always going to be a box or two that's not being checked. These are things you need to talk with about your buyer. Letting them know that there are things that you're going to have to assume as a homeowner, right? Not everything's going to be perfect. Even new constructed property is not perfect. Making sure you choose an inspector wisely. So if you're a buyer agent, I'm suggesting that you recommend inspectors to your buyer. You don't want them just choosing any inspector. And it's not that you're looking to stack the deck and have the inspector leave out information. That's not the case at all. It's the inspectors giving all the information they need to give. However, they're delivering it in a way that is what I call, they're not being an alarmist, right? They're not saying, oh, this house is gonna fall down. They're not gonna, if there's a leak in the roof, they may just say that, this roof is at the end of its life expectancy. You're probably gonna need a new roof. This is something that needs to be repaired immediately versus the house is gonna cave in at any moment. So it's the delivery of the information. The good inspectors know they're talking to the buyer as a homeowner already. They're not the person that's standing in the way of the deal happening. And I think a lot of inspectors' mentality is just that. They're going there and they literally think that you were there an hour before them covering up shit in the property, covering patches and hiding stuff, and clearly that's not the case. So you want to make sure you choose an inspector who is in it for the transaction, and if there's bad information to deliver, they're delivering that information. They're just not putting their own personal thoughts and beliefs in that property. I've learned that a long time ago, that a property that you love, your buyers may not love. A property that you hate, your buyers may love. So it's not for you to determine, or an inspector or anyone else. Who are we to say what someone should like? Our job is to meet our clients' expectations and then follow those through. If my clients are saying this is the house, then I need to make sure that they have an opportunity to get that house, and I'm getting them that house. I found out quickly, right, going on one of my first showings, and I'm sitting here like, this property ain't it. I turn to my buyers and they're like, this is it. I'm like, okay, all right. But again, like, who am I to tell them not to buy that property, right? If that fits their check boxes and they can see themselves living there, then I should be a professional agent that gets them into that property. So submit offers based off what you already know. A lot of the major components of a property you can know before you even put an offer on the table. That way, when the inspection comes up, it's not something that really needs to be even discussed or negotiated upon. You already know. We don't need an inspector telling us the roof is at the end of its life. We knew that. We had the age of the roof before we put the offer in. Same thing with the heating system and the electrical. Let's try to get as much information as we can about the property before we put an offer in. That way, when we do put an offer in, our offer is based off of the knowledge that we already know about the aged roof, the heating systems, and all those repairs that we're probably going to need to make. in the coming years. All right, next up is the purchase and sales. And the purchase and sales they offer in Massachusetts is just a page or two. The purchase and sales is about 20 pages, give or take. So you're gonna have a lot more details in the purchase and sales, and we need to be prepared for that. It's also the point in the transaction where the buyer comes to the table with their second deposit check. Make sure your buyers and your sellers are communicating with the attorneys that are preparing the purchase and sales, and if there's any questions that they're directing them towards that attorney. Your job as an agent is not to give legal advice. So stay out of it. There's so many agents that want to prove their knowledge and their smarts and I know this legal jargon, I'm going to tell you this and this is what that means. It's like, listen, that's not the right thing to do. That's a good way to get you in trouble, a good way to put you in some hot water. So don't do that. Leave that to the professionals where that's their lane. Make sure your buyer has their funds for their second deposit ready. So all that should be detailed in the original offer. If there's $30,000 that needs to be given with that second deposit when the purchase and sales is signed, make sure your buyer has that available, that they have those funds in their checking account. If that's funds that are being transferred from another savings or whatever it is, that they have enough time to do that. Make sure your buyers are prepared to sign the purchase and sales when it is finalized by the attorney. Let them know the day, coordinate a time that makes sense for them. They can sign it electronically. It's the buyer's obligation to sign that purchase and sales and have that and have that second deposit with that purchase and sales ready at the date that the purchase and sales is supposed to be signed, and having that sent over to the seller with it already signed by the buyer. You want to make sure that you're working with an attorney, whether you're on the buyer side or the seller side, who's not going to be an attorney that makes a habit out of extending a purchase and sale signing because they weren't ready, they didn't have enough time to. Our attorneys have time, so you want to make sure that your attorney is on the ball when making sure that they have that purchase and sales finalized with the other side. And if there's any extensions needed, it's not going to be on your side, it's going to be on the other side. After the purchase and sales, the next step is the appraisal. And the appraisal is basically something that may be an issue if the property was priced at a price that attracted a lot of buyers, a lot of interest, and maybe it got bid up and the property was priced at, let's just say, $500,000, it sold for $650,000. So you now have $150,000 over asking. Now you have an appraiser comes in who basically says the property's not worth that $650,000, it's only worth $600,000, which is the amount that the bank is willing to loan on it. There's a discrepancy there that has to be figured out between the buyer and the seller. Now, the buyer could walk away from the deal. The seller certainly doesn't have to sell for the $600,000 that it's appraised for. The buyer could bring an additional $50,000 to the table for that $650,000 because the bank's not going to loan on it. The question is, do they even have that amount of money to bring to the table? The seller could just take that price off and say, you know what, we had $650,000. I know it's not appraised for that. I'll come down to the $600,000, just sell it for $600,000. So there's a bunch of different options there that are up for discussion and to be negotiated between both sides. The commitment is the next step after the appraisal, and the commitment is something that you should have already really figured out at the pre-approval stage at the beginning when you're talking to the lender and making sure that their pre-approval that they issued is valid. And if that is valid and strong, the commitment shouldn't be an issue. So you should have that conversation early on with the lender and then follow up maybe a week or so prior to the commitment and make sure everything is still on track. What could go wrong in a final walkthrough? Well, there's a lot of things that could go wrong. I had an issue where the buyers were told that there was no water ever in the property since the owners have owned the property. The agent swore up and down that there was no water, never has been any water, and the sellers obviously told them that information. And I believe the agent wasn't trying to hide anything. During the final walkthrough, there was probably water, maybe a foot of water, standing water in the basement. Agent standing down there, Chris, I don't know what happened. I don't know. The sellers told me there's no water. And here my buyers are looking at this water standing in the basement like, do I really want to buy this house still? And of course they did want to buy that house still, but they wanted to obviously fix that situation and they needed to be compensated for that, right? So there were some negotiations that were had and they were given additional money at closing. So all that stuff can be negotiated during the closing. even if it's during that day that you're doing that final walkthrough. So what could go wrong during the final walkthrough? We have to set realistic expectations with the buyer. So we don't want a buyer there doing another inspection, because if you don't tell them what to expect, they may think it's another opportunity to go through and crawl in the attic and, you know, run all the water and do all these tests and stuff, and it's really not. It's really just to walk through the property and make sure that the property has been vacated, all of the personal belongings are out, there's no trash, nothing like that. So we want to make sure we let our buyers know that this walkthrough, final walkthrough, should only take 10 minutes at most. We're just walking through the property and confirming that everything's out. For a seller, we want to set proper expectations there. Hey, if you're moving out of this property, you probably want to be moved out a couple days prior than the closing, not the day of the closing, because the buyer's going to be walking through expecting it to be empty. And if we have a bunch of stuff there, that may be a cost, an additional cost that you might have to take on at the closing. If there's a bunch of trash on the outside of the property, because a lot of times people don't get dumpsters, they try to have it just be hauled away with the city or town trash, and there's more trash than expected, so there's piles of trash, and a lot of times that is an additional fee that the seller may have to credit to the buyer for removal of that junk. The biggest thing is anticipating what could go wrong in every stage that we talked about. Anticipating what the worst case scenario is and going over that with our buyers and sellers, because if we can go through those scenarios, if they do happen, it's not as bad, right? Because we've already had that conversation, we've given a couple of options, and in their mind, they're prepared for it because you were aware of this being a potential option. So think about those scenarios that we discussed and go over them with your clients. Go through the different options and the good and the bad. Definitely the bad, worst case scenarios, not to be pessimistic about anything, but we do want to know the worst case scenarios, and it's going to be respect from our clients, because they're going to say, you know what, if that does happen, at least it sounds like this guy knows how to navigate through them. So know all of the options, worst case scenarios, go over them with your clients, both on the buying side and seller side, and I can guarantee that this will help you keep deals together in your real estate transaction. So I appreciate you guys watching. Subscribe, like, comment, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.